From the Folger Shakespeare Library, this is Shakespeare Unlimited. I'm Farah Kareem Cooper, the Folger Director. One of the pleasures of going to a Shakespeare play is seeing a new interpretation of familiar material. The text stays more or less the same, while everything else changes from production to production. But what if it didn't work that way? What if each time you showed up at the theater, you got a brand new play, never to be repeated? That's what you get at a performance of the Improvised Shakespeare Company, a new play made up on the spot by expert improvisers. All they require is a title suggested by the audience, and they're off and running. For the past 2 decades, Improvised Shakespeare has performed regularly in Chicago and Los Angeles, as well as touring internationally. The idea to improvise an entire play in the style of William Shakespeare came to founder Blaine Swen in 2005. At the time, Swen was a philosophy PhD student at Loyola University and a comedy student at Chicago's Second City. Fellow actor Ross Bryant joined the company in its early days. Here are Blaine Swen and Ross Bryant in conversation with Barbara Bogave.
Blaine and Ross, I'm so glad you're here.
Us too. Thanks for having us, Barbara.
Yes, so happy to be here.
I don't know if this is an obnoxious thing to ask you straight off, but I was thinking since your shows always start with a suggested title from the audience, maybe we could start the way you start your performance. And maybe I could throw out some titles and you could pick the least bad one, because they're all bad, and do an opening scene. How does that sound?
Right out of the gate. Okay.
Wow, really putting us on the spot.
Right. I hope you're warmed up.
Okay, let's give it a try.
Okay,
Sure.
so how about Othello's Stein, Wuthering Blights, If I Had Tights, I Would Kick You, Macbethula, Henry IV, Part 2, Electric Boogaloo, Orange Julius Caesar.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And this is an oldie but a goodie from The Good Place, Tempest 2, Here We Blow Again. And then I was remembering that we had a guest on the show, very wonderful writer, Margot Hendricks, and she's known for her endless Shakespeare puns, and one of hers is, Now is the winter of our disco tent.
Hey, since that's the one we've heard most recently,
Yes.
so that your listeners don't think we're just like sitting here thinking, why don't we take Now is the winter of our disco tent?
I think that's a great idea. Yes. Welcome all to the first, the last, the only time the Improvised Shakespeare Company will ever present Now is the winter
of our disco tent.
I'm getting chills.
Here now. Alas, a crown I desire upon my head, but to obtain such a crown the king must be dead. A king who reigns upon me like no other, for the king who is there is now yet my brother. And yet, if I desire to have my regal chance, I must strike down my brother, and then I can dance.
Most noble brother, goodly brother Richard, 'tis well that thou hast come to see me upon this golden and lustrous day of my coronation, when I do ascend upon the golden throne, with this coronet upon my head, and our entire household doth rise in all its fortunes. Aye, indeed, for we in noble battles there did strive, and I can trust that for many years I shall be staying alive.
Staying alive. Staying alive. So you shall be, my brother, and ever you shall thrive. Ah, yes, staying alive.
Yes, good times are ahead of us, most noble Richard, and this very eve, the Queen and I shall make merry. We shall set our pavilion upon the verdant field, and there make light our heels in nightly reels and dancing to an irresponsible lateness. And I do hope that thou shalt join us in these festivities, though thou art not fitted for dancing? I have not known thee to cut a caper in the past.
And so I have not, my brother. My body was not made for such things. You were made for higher glories than me, and I but bask in your collateral light.
Then in my collateral light I beg thee, thrive, for after this night I will survive.
I had a bet with myself how long it would take you to say "staying alive." And you beat it.
Yeah,
I lost.
Is that enough of a taste, Barbara?
Yes,
That was-
yes.
That was perfect. I
Oh,
will
good.
survive.
Oh, good. That's great. Right. Good.
Oh, man. Okay, so let's roll it back.
Okay.
Right to the beginning. Blaine, how do you choose your titles? What do you
Well-
look for and what do you avoid?
Yes, what I try to do is I typically take the first thing that I hear clearly. I ask for a title out of the gate. I say, would someone so moved or inspired shout out a title of a play that has never been written? And people start shouting. And if people have seen us before, it's a cacophony. If we're in a brand new place where we've never performed, sometimes there's this beat of silence where the audience goes, I think they really do want us to shout something. And then somebody will sometimes even raise their hand and I'll ask. But if people have seen it before, we get a lot of shouting at once and it's hard to hear anything. So I'll take the first thing I can hear clearly.
So
Or
really, if
sometimes-
you heard bad clam, that you just go with it.
I would take it. I would
Absolutely.
just take it. And sometimes if I can't hear anything, somebody has a sign up and I can read their sign, or I look for somebody who has sane eyes, and I try to pick an audience member with
Well,
sane
in
eyes.
LA,
and
that
I
might be
ask them.
hard.
Usually, you can find somebody, and then I take their title, and then we're off and running.
Okay, so you grab onto to something you hear clearly. How do you then arrive at a structure, and what is the scaffolding that you're working with beyond 90 minutes? Is it always 5 acts? Is it a classical structure or a Shakespearean structure?
Yeah, we
That's
hold
a
ourselves to a hard Aristotelian structure. No, not at all. There is a structure. And if you see the show several times, you will see the very light scaffolding upon which the show rests. Both Blaine and I kind of come from the world of Chicago improv. We both took classes out there and were in that community for a very long time. And one of the classic structures of improvisation, of long-form improvisation of the type that we've done for a long time, is something that your listeners may know of as the herald. And the way that usually works in its broadest strokes is that the audience yells out a suggestion, and then the entire ensemble does some sort of opening where they sort of like try to pick apart that suggestion for themes and ideas, almost like a brainstorming session. And then you see 3 scenes connected to those themes. And then you see a group scene where people, where you sort of revisit them as a whole ensemble again.
So this is evolving in the open as you listen to each other.
Very much so.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sort of loose structure of opening, scenes, group scene, that's as much of a structure as our show has.
So you don't have Shakespearean plot points or beats that you're hitting.
No,
Well, yeah, not specifically.
not specifically.
We don't plan anything except that we know that somebody is going to introduce the show with a prologue. We don't know who it's going to be. We know that it's going to rhyme, and we know that it's going to be inspired by the title of the play.
So it's the first person to have the idea, and
Yes,
much.
it's the first
Okay.
person to step forward and claim it. And if you come see one of our shows, you'll see, after we shout the title, there's a blackout, and you'll almost see this. You might see this unspoken negotiation between silhouettes in the dark as
Oh,
to
that's
who's
what
going
I
to
thought
step
was
forward
the
and
huddle.
take the prologue.
Yeah, there is no huddle, so to speak. What you may think is a huddle in the dark is really usually 1 or 3 of us lunging for that center spot.
Yes, yes. So there are never any elbows to get to the prologue. People step forward, and then if 3 people step forward, 2 people will quickly pull back.
Yes.
For one reason or another, they'll yield it to someone, and then the prologue will begin, and that counts as our opening, which is usually in the Herald. It's kind of a brainstorm that you do, inspired by the suggestion. So for us, the opening prologue is our way of brainstorming the suggestion in front of the audience. They'll hear the suggestion kind of explored through rhyming couplets. They might hear some themes inspired, and it also gives them the opportunity to acclimate their ear to the style of speaking that we'll be doing throughout the show. Because when you watch a Shakespearean play, do you know how it sort of, or for me, it takes, 15, 20 minutes to sort of really acclimate myself to Elizabethan dialogue, and then I'm immersed more in the play. For us, I think the curve is more like 90 seconds, but we spend that 90 seconds in the prologue helping the audience attune their ear to what
So
they're
kind of
about
warming
to hear.
us all up. And we heard the language that you use, but maybe you could elaborate on that, because you stick with the Shakespearean language, but that means more than thou and doth and codpiece and stuff.
Yes, hopefully. At
Yes.
our best. Yeah. And we do, no other improv show that I've ever been a part of featured vocabulary quizzes as part of its rehearsal process, except this one.
Seriously.
We really did
Yes.
study hard on what you said. That's just sort of, at the very basics, the rules of these, thous, thys, thines, but also really trying to expand our vocabulary to include as much of the esoteric Shakespeare vocabulary as possible. And we do read and reread the plays to try to get ourselves on the wavelength of the rhythms and the syntax and all that. And so we try to the best of our ability, imitate the grammar and the vocabulary, and hopefully the lyricism of that speech. And in particular, I think that's trying to work in as many fun and interesting similes and metaphors as possible.
Yeah, and even to that end, in line with studying our vocabulary, we've sort of tried to explore developing metaphor by going outside of Shakespeare's plays and reading as a group Plato's Republic, and trying to give more depths to our metaphors and lean into the poetic element that the form lends to us, as well as the comedic element that is part of it.
World's geekiest improv group.
Put it on the poster, Barbara. Put it on the poster.
Well, Blaine, you're, as the founder and the leader, are you also a kind of director of sorts during the performance? Do you nudge your group in certain directions, and how do you
You mean
do it?
during the performance?
Yes.
That's a good question. I think that it's important when we play that we are all just players, and the goal is to purely support whatever is on stage. That's the key, I think.
Yes, and.
Yes. To successful improv, a lot of people think when you improvise, the key is you've got to really think of something funny to say, and you've got to have a great idea of what to say. For us, the key is I've got to empty my brain and listen and just really concentrate on what's happening on stage and what the other person is saying, because my goal is to make that person look as good as possible. That's what I'm after. And my goal is to take whatever they're saying, treat it like it's poetry and genius, and build on it as best as I can.
Wow, and to empty your brain, though, you have to fill it with stuff. So you said you were often reading the plays. You're always reading the plays. Do you prepare in a sense that way for improv? Do you, for your kind of performances, do you dwell or think about certain themes before each show?
That's a really good question, and kind of emblematic of a broader question that you sometimes hear, like, how do you rehearse for improv?
That actually was my question.
And, yeah. It sounded like the question you actually asked. I think the good comparison is weirdly from sports, where no basketball team plays the same game of basketball each time. They have to be reactive to each other and play to the moment of that particular game. But there's a set of fundamental skills that a basketball team can practice to hopefully ensure that they'll play a better game of basketball each time. And the way you rehearse for improvisation is very similar, where there's fundamental skills that we practice and dedicate ourselves to as a group, so that we can kind of, like you say, empty your mind during the show and just play it as it lays. So we do a lot of exercises that have to do with listening and retention and memory and
Like
loosening up and being silly. For example, to kind of get us into the mode of like, we stand in a circle and we begin going around listing Shakespearean names. It could be a name from an actual play, or it could be one that could be, and we go all the way around the ensemble one or two times, listing names. The goal being like they should be names that would be in the same kind of world of a play, right? That imply a setting, a Shakespearean setting. So for example, if the first person says like Lysander, then the next person would probably say something like Helena or Demetrius or Pericles rather than Duncan. But the way this exercise would work is we kind of go around the circle listing names until the last person declares their name and the location the play is in. So the rhythm of it would be like Lysander, Demetrius, Helena, Pericles, Hippolyta, Sparta.
Okay, but everybody has off nights. And improv is such a high wire act. What's an off night like for you guys? I always wondered about that. And do you pick up slack for each other, or and do you always know why it's off?
Well, you mentioned something very interesting. Do we pick up slack for each other? I'll say this is something that gives me so much encouragement going into our shows because I know that Ross has my back. We literally, before we go on stage, look each other in the eye, pat each other on the back and say, I've got your back. Yes. And this is kind of a popular thing to do in improv. And when Ross says that to me, I know he means it. And when we go on stage, I can play with a sort of fearlessness, even if that day I'm off for whatever reason or I'm tired. I know that no matter what I do, Ross is going to support it. And so I can play with a sort of fearlessness and not worry about myself as much. And that really frees me up in a very exciting way. But there's also this interesting thing that happens when I think a show is so spectacular. Sometimes the audience will just, I'll think a show, this was couldn't have been better. I can think of specific shows that seem to like map a real Shakespearean play in a very interesting way. We did one that sort of mapped Twelfth Night in Denver, or The Winter's Tale in Denver as well. And we did one in DC. I remember that sort of mapped As You Like It. And these are some of my favorites because they so genuinely reflect a real Shakespearean play, and it feels like we're firing on all cylinders and reading each other's minds, and the characters have cool depth, and I think this is so great. This is a great play, and we'll get done, and the audience will applaud and cheer, and it'll feel like no, it's even better. That I'll be like that was really good. Yeah. But then there's ones that we do where it's like, oh my goodness, how are we gonna pull this together? Yeah. And we are stretching the strings of the storyline, and we are barely tying the ends together and hoping they'll hold, and we will get done, and we will be pouring sweat, and the audience will leap to their feet screaming, this was the best thing I've ever seen.
What Blaine is describing is emblematic of something we've experienced, where that first play that felt to us like, oh my God, the muses were speaking through us. We were telepathic with each other. It felt so smooth. And the one where we're like, how do we land this plane where the engine is falling off? I think the audience kind of loves to watch kind of the struggle. They like to see some of that math
They like
being
to see
done.
you suffer.
Yeah.
You get two plays.
Feel the suspense.
Yes. You kind of get two plays. There's the play of the story that we're sort of telling as performers, but there's also the play that is this sort of meta conversation of the show as we're sort of like trying to actually tell this story. They're the story of the story, and they're the story of the improvisers trying to tell the story. Yes. And there are shows where that meta conversation sort of overtakes the other one for a moment,
and it's really dramatic.
Yeah. Yeah, and the audience sees us with our hammers and levers trying to like force the thing into shape, and I think that can be also really, really fun.
I think the audience must thrive on that. It's the show that goes wrong feeling.
Totally.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
The meta. Who knew how meta this could be?
Because some of my favorite moments from shows are moments where like maybe the listening suddenly fails for a moment, or like someone mishears something and a turn of phrase slips out in a peculiar way. And what's fun in our show is like we like to think of that thing you always hear about Shakespeare, that Shakespeare coined words. Shakespeare the first instance of moonbeam and eyeball. And we're like, okay, great. In our show, this weird turn of phrase is just something everyone says. This thing that you accidentally stumbled into, we're really going to heighten that now and make your quote unquote mistake extremely important and keep bringing it back over the course of the show. So the things that might be considered mistakes or things going wrong, quote unquote, are actually enormous gifts because they give us so much fuel to power the show.
Happy accidents,
exactly.
as they say in Wabi
Yeah.
Sabi. This is something I was thinking about beforehand, and now as you speak. When you see Shakespeare performed straight, I mean, not improv Shakespeare, when you go to Shakespeare performances, do you see them differently than I do or hear them differently? Do you look for different things because you're so attuned to improv?
I think I'm just like, I'm trying to tune my ear, like Blaine was saying, kind of get that 15, 20 minutes for you to kind of sink in to the play and kind of acclimatize your mind to Elizabethan dialogue. I try to do that and I'm looking for turns of phrase and interesting poetic dialogue that I maybe that has not resonated with me before when I've read or seen the play. And I just try to grab it and hold on to it. And it's like, ooh, I would love to try to bring something like that into the show. Not as if I'm like writing it in a journal to like really plan for later, but I just try to put it in some sort of mental back pocket to see if it could come out at an appropriate time.
What's the last play you saw?
I think the last play I saw was Love's Labour's Lost. The Shakespearean comedies are really cool. I'm always impressed and interested in how different ensembles and theater companies bring the comedies to life and bring the comedy to life. Because sometimes, gosh, some of the comedic dialogue in the plays just still hits. It really does still resonate and is sincerely funny. And there's some, just because of the gulfs of time that separate the topical humor of Shakespeare's time with ours, where I think it's extremely difficult to connect with an audience. Love's Labour's Lost, like the clowns in there, like Holofernes and Moth and all, like some of the clownish comedy scenes in that play have a lot to do with how well the audience can recognize Latin malapropisms, which is,
they're right top of mind.
pretty big lift for a contemporary audience.
So you need a lot of physical comedy or it's all in the performance to bring them
Exactly.
Right?
That is something that strikes me as well when I'm watching Shakespeare, is how the groundlings probably must have experienced it differently. Like Shakespeare's references were so present and available right off the top of their head without having to go away and study. It was just culturally available. And Shakespeare was relying on cultural touchstones of his day, making references to things that were happening, right then in pop culture or politics or daily life. And that's something that, we in our shows get to take advantage of. We can make a reference to a disco song in our show that you get immediately. You don't necessarily have to go away and research it. You get it immediately, and you get the laugh from the reference. Shakespeare, sometimes I say Shakespeare had scripture and Shakespeare has Greek mythology, and in an Elizabethan context, people were very ready for those references. We can still reference scripture and Greek mythology, but we can also reference Beatles lyrics and
Or Taylor
Disney
Swift
mythology.
or whatever.
Yes. And the audience will get it right away in the way a groundling would. And so we can get that sort of raucous energy going in our shows that I imagine Shakespeare had going with his.
Well, Blaine, 20 years of this show, going on 21, right? You started this troupe in 2005 in Chicago.
That's right.
So why an improv group and why Shakespeare?
Well, so I was in Chicago in 2005. I was in grad school at Loyola University, and I was studying philosophy. And so I auditioned to be in the conservatory at Second City and got into the conservatory there. And they had a great stage where they encouraged students to experiment called Donnie's Skybox. And I thought that would be a really fun place to put on a Shakespearean improv show. And I had had some experience doing Shakespearean improv before I moved to Chicago with different groups in California, notably a group called the Backstreet Bards, which in 1999 was very topical. So,
Backstreet, I get it.
and so I thought, well, I can put together a group to do Shakespearean improv and lean on some of the things that I'm learning in improv classes. And also, I had been touring with a troupe that went into Chicago public schools and encouraged students to write plays as a creative outlet. And I thought we can use some of these techniques for playwriting and some improv techniques. And I think we can really put together something special. And so I started a group that called the Improvised Shakespeare Company that was going to perform a fully improvised Shakespearean play for 5 shows at Donnie Skybox, the student stage at the Second City.
Were you already a big Shakespeare guy, though?
I would say I was an improv guy first. I liked Shakespeare a lot. I had performed Shakespeare. I'd been Mercutio and Romeo and Juliet in high school and really loved doing that. And then, performed in The Winter's Tale in college. And so I had done some Shakespearean plays and I enjoyed watching Shakespeare. But I would describe myself more as a Monty Python guy at the time than a Shakespeare guy. And so the show started out, it first was more of a parody of Shakespeare. And the way that it evolved to become better was when we started to lean in to the Shakespeare portion of the show more seriously. And we would start to try to write a love letter to Shakespeare instead of a parody of Shakespeare. And that's when the show really started taking off.
Wow,
and
because
the
it was
comedy got better.
richer or deeper, so there's
I
more
think
for you
so.
to draw on, or audience, or you're really tapping into kind of essential, universal themes and ideas that the audience could relate to.
I think all of the above. And in Chicago, in our comedy training, there's this phrase called truth in comedy, where you, instead of trying to be funny, you go for something honest. You try to be honest, you try to be true, and the comedy follows, is the idea. And the more we tried to do something honestly Shakespearean, the harder the comedy would land. And the more we even pursued the poetic side of what we were doing, the funnier the show got.
How about you, Ross? How did you end up with these guys?
Much like Blaine, I had done like a play in college. I was Shakespeare curious, but I was not a full Shakespeare devotee.
What role had you played?
I had been in Hamlet, double cast as the gravedigger and the player king.
Gravedigger, great part.
Great part.
Yeah.
It was very, very fun. And I think the thing that keeps coming up when we kind of reminisce about this is that we started to just invest emotionally in the plays more. Really, really lean into the characters' emotional wants. It made the stories more rich. It made plots just kind of happen without a lot of thinking. And the amount of emotional intensity that Shakespeare gives you license to bring to a show is one of the things that makes this so much fun for a performer and hopefully for an audience.
Yeah.
Is that like Shakespeare characters don't feel things halfway. So you have license to go so hard.
Well, building on that, hearkening back to the beginning of our conversation and your opening scene, the winter of our disco tent, how would that plot deepen? How do you think that plot would go?
Gosh, yeah, it's interesting.
Wow.
This is a cool question because
Yeah.
to kind of beat out a show, so all we know is that we know that title in the first scene. You've got Richard, who's
He
the sort
wants
of
to
Richard.
dance. That's all
He
he
wants
wants.
to-
It's very
he wants to
Monty-
dance and he wants
Monty
the crown.
Python-esque.
Yeah. I mean, it could go any number of ways. One thing that would likely happen in this show, we like to point out that Caesar was killed in the middle of Julius Caesar, and sometimes when you're improvising, you have this temptation to procrastinate a lot of the action, and so we think, oh, Richard won't kill Henry until the end of the play. But in our show, we found that staying on the front lines of the improv keeps things very exciting. So instead of kicking something down the line, we'll have a beat that we're going to get to. Richard would probably kill Henry in that play.
Yeah.
In Winter of Our Disco Tent early on, and then
I
we
wanna
would
say
see
that
some of the fallout.
If we'd allowed that scene to go on maybe 1 minute longer, Richard probably would have killed him in the first scene.
Oh yes, oh yes, and then he would have just said, we are family.
Yeah, we are family. Yeah.
At the risk of just wringing all of the comedy out of this conversation, why is it better to not procrastinate? What does that do for you? Improv
Because it gets you out of planning brain and gets you into active brain. The more you're kind of delaying a payoff like that, the more you're kind of building up suspense for something that's going to happen later, rather than playing the immediacy of what's right in front of you. And it's always good to have a character that is actively pursuing the thing that they want. So if that thing is destroying someone, then unless there's a reason, like a real compelling narrative reason not to, why not just go do it? Because that is what happens in the Shakespeare plays. When you're coming up in improv, that's something that you're very much told not to do. I don't know if you've ever seen, like, for example, if people here are not just fans of Shakespeare but also The Office, when they do an improv class on The Office, Michael Scott is pulling a gun on everyone, and that is sort of a parody of a type of person that you get in an improv class who wants to like shoot everyone he's in a scene with. So we can kill characters in these shows, and there's kind of a liberty to that.
Yeah.
So
but it's totally
it's freeing
justified.
you from all of those strictures and all of the expectations too. It sounds like it's really opening up the whole, bringing in oxygen.
Yes, I think so. And like Ross said, really keeping us in the moment and where we can find that sort of magic of the spontaneous.
Yeah, there's the scene taking place, but there's also, other actors on the sidelines watching and listening. And it's impossible not to plan a little bit when we're listening. Like, there's parts of your brain that are like, oh, it could go here, it could go here. I could maybe bring in this kind of character. I could maybe take it in this direction. But you got to know that there's this difference between established fiction in improv and potential fiction. And everything that you are imagining as potential fiction could go away and change in a heartbeat if it were to contradict with the established fiction of what's going on stage. So all your plans, as much as you might have them, you have to hold very lightly, knowing that you're going to discard them in a second if it veers off in another direction. Some of my favorite moments in these shows are when, like, you're on the sidelines and a two-person scene is being improvised in front of you. And then suddenly one of them will kind of turn and look at you and be like, "Steward, what do you think?" or like,
yes,
or like, "Aristophanes, get in here." And you, who are like, "Wait, me?" You suddenly step on stage, and it puts you in this place where you're pure reaction, pure reactivity. And that's the best place to be improvising from, is you just respond to what's happening.
You might even enter the scene thinking you're going to be the king, and they'll say, "Steward, what do you think?" And you immediately have to, "I'm not the king anymore. I'm the steward, and here's what I think."
That is a very frequent thing in our shows. I feel like if a person enters with this very high status, swaggering energy, the other character has not noticed that, and they're like, "Lady Anne, are you here to fetch the scullery?" And you see, and you're like, "Okay, I guess Lady Anne kind of walks like a quarterback."
This is maybe an obvious question, but what is it about Shakespeare that really suits improv? I mean, you could do Brecht improv, you could do Stephen Sondheim improv. I'm sure you'd be all really funny on that.
Oh, yeah.
And there are people who do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Something that relates to what Ross has mentioned earlier is that one reason Shakespeare and improv go so well together is that I think Shakespeare gives us a list of passionate archetypes that we can play with. And I think improv is great when performers can play characters that have strong points of view and passionate desires. And, Shakespeare characters are big, and they're bold, and they're rich, and they're hungry for power, or they're desperate for love, and some of them would die for money, or some would die for honor, or some would kill for revenge, or some would just kill for any reason, So it really lends itself to improvisation. On top of that, Shakespeare affords us the ability to play with poetry as well, and so we can be goofballs and we can be poets in the same scene.
Yeah, my favorite shows are ones where there will be scenes and moments that are just so profoundly silly and stupid, and we're barely holding it together, like almost like crying, laughing, and then someone will improvise like a piece of dialogue that seems so appropriately Shakespearean and poetic and true that it could have come from the canon, and you can feel like this little murmur ripple through the audience of like, wow, that was actually kind of profound. Like, and I love that the show can contain both.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, on top of that, I mentioned cultural touchstones, and I mentioned we have Disney mythology, but we also have the Shakespearean canon, where people have experience. People know whether you loved Shakespeare or you really wrestled with him in high school. You know who Romeo and Juliet are.
Yeah,
everyone has a relationship. Yeah,
Yeah.
Everyone's at least been forced to read Shakespeare at some point.
Everyone's brushed up against Shakespeare.
Yeah. So I feel like almost everyone has like Blaine was saying, has a relationship with Romeo and Juliet, where they might not have the same kind of relationship with like Mother Courage or the characters of Merrily We Roll Along.
Well, Blaine, just one last question for you. There is so much concern about the financial health of theater right now in America, and general belt tightening and the political turmoil that keeps people away from the arts in general and theater in particular. What is your experience on that front with improv? Or your thoughts about it?
I mean, these are big questions. Our experience is that interestingly, people are still coming to the show, and people still want to laugh. For us as performers, and I think even for some of the audience, sometimes there's a sense of like almost feeling guilty for laughing, especially because the news cycle is 24/7, and we're very aware of heavy things going on. And so some people come and very explicitly tell us, they're looking to laugh as medicine and escape, and a break. And I think there's always going to be a place for joy, and there's always going to be a place for laughter, even if the joy and laughter is part of your effort of resilience or resistance. And I think that people crave that.
Well, Ross and Blaine, I just love talking with you, and I can't wait to see another performance.
Oh my gosh, great to talk to you too, Barbara. Thank you for having us.
Yes, great to talk to you. Our pleasure.
That was Blaine Swen and Ross Bryant, interviewed by Barbara Bogave. You can catch the Improvised Shakespeare Company at Chicago's I.O. Theater every Friday and Saturday. They also have upcoming dates in Los Angeles, Princeton, Brooklyn, Denver, and Ann Arbor. For tickets and more information, visit improvisedshakespeare.com. This episode was produced by Matt Frasica. Garland Scott is the executive producer. It was edited by Gail Kern-Pastor. We had technical help from Voice Tracks West in Studio City, California. Our web producer is Paula Garcia Acuna. Leonor Fernandez edits our transcripts. Final mixing services provided by Clean Cuts at 3Cs Inc. If you're a fan of Shakespeare Unlimited, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Shakespeare Unlimited comes to you from the Folger Shakespeare Library. Home to the world's largest Shakespeare collection, the Folger is dedicated to advancing knowledge and the arts. If you're in Washington, D.C., come visit the Folger on Capitol Hill. Come face-to-face with a Shakespeare First Folio in our exhibition halls, or take in a play in our theater, or enjoy our Quill and Crumb Cafe. We'd love to see you. For more information, visit our website, folger.edu. Until next time, thanks for listening.